Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Meals to Unalive For, where we talk about a true crime case and make a death row meal from scratch. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. Today we're going to be talking about a man named John Richard Blackwell. John was born December 10th, 1954 in Massillon, Ohio. His parents were Jeanette and Dwight Blackwell. John was the youngest of 4 children. He had one older brother and 2 sisters. The family moved to Sanford, Florida in 1960, and Dwight opens a bar, but this isn't a good thing considering he's an alcoholic. Then the family moves to Fort Pierce in 1963. Sometime in between, they send John to a boarding school called the Sanford Naval Academy. According to John, when he was 11 years old, a teacher molests him at the academy. One night, the teacher, Mr. Monday, took John and some other boys to the movies. Later that night, John was brought to Mr. Monday's room where he was essayed. The next day, the commandant asked John why he had been in the hallway crying, and John told him everything. The commandant scolded John and told him to just forget about all of it, and shortly after, Mr. Monday was fired. And apparently, the school told John's parents that he had been quote-unquote messed with by a teacher, but it really wasn't brought to light, I think, what actually happened. So unfortunately, John never got any help. After this incident, John started acting out by smoking, stealing hubcaps off cars, and finally started breaking into vehicles in the parking lot. It's like, geez, I wonder why he started acting out. As a result of all the misbehaving, the school put John on a bus back home. He would finish out high school at a public school nearby, and after graduating, he started working full-time for the family business. The family owned a restaurant, and unfortunately, John's parents never really compensated him fairly. They seemed to think that letting him live in their house and drive their vehicles was enough. So he always felt trapped and in this never-ending cycle of not having enough money to move out or really do anything, but not being compensated fairly. On Halloween 1975, John was convicted of sexual battery. Now, I couldn't find any information in regards to this conviction. I think the documents are sealed because his offenses involve minors, so all we know is that he did something sinister on Halloween and that he was sentenced to 16 years, but I don't know how much time he actually served. Then on July 1st, 1998, John was convicted of molesting a 10-year-old boy, and once again, this was all the information I could find about it. He would end up getting life for this offense, so I can only imagine how brutal it was or what they found, but to be honest, I'm totally fine with not finding it. I imagine that if I were a child in that situation, or if I had children, I don't think that I would want all of that information on the internet for everyone to read. So I completely understand why it's not on there, and that's okay. John was also convicted in 1991 on federal charges of threatening the Vice President Dan Quayle at the time. He called the Secret Service, Miami Television, and the TV series America's Most Wanted, saying that he would eliminate Quayle and put him on a slab if he didn't receive $10 million. John was serving time at the Columbia Correction Institute in Florida for his crimes against children. It was said that John was having a very hard time in prison, which caused him to seek out help for his mental health. However, he slowly lost faith in the prison's mental health system. I guess he had been really bullied and was having a very hard time in prison due to his offenses against children, which honestly, I don't have a lot of sympathy for people like this. If you hurt a child, this is honestly what you deserve, but obviously it's an escalation of what happened over time to his mental health, and what lengths he would go to make it all stop. As a result of his mistrust in the system, he stopped taking his psychotropic medication on March 27th, 2000. Another inmate would introduce John Blackwell to Raymond D. Wigley. John needed funds to buy soda and toiletries, and Wigley offered a deal. If John served Wigley changing his bed sheets, gave massages, and among other small tasks, then Wigley would pay for the things that John needed. After 2 weeks of this arrangement, Wigley wanted to break the deal, and John agreed. 1 week after they terminated the arrangement, so at this point it's 3 weeks down the road, Wigley approaches John to reinstate the arrangement. Wigley said to show that he was sincere, he said that he would perform oral on John. After, John told Wigley that he was not interested in pursuing a relationship with him. However, John knew that Wigley would continue to bother him about a relationship, so he made a decision. On May 6, 2000, Wigley showed up to John's cell sometime after lunch, and John's roommate wasn't there at the time. Wigley asked for some type of sexual activity. John agreed on the condition that he could tie Wigley up. Wigley stripped down, then laid face down on the bed and allowed John to tie his hands and feet. John took his own pants off and sat on Wigley's back. John asked, "Are you ready for the fun?" then looped a cloth around Wigley's neck and began to strangle him. Wigley told him to stop and that it was hurting him. In response, John said, "Really? Ain't that a bitch? You should have thought about that before. We might just finish it." After that, John ended Wigley's life. John then walked to the captain's office where he advised the officers that there was a dead one in there. Jack Sersch, the CA who ran the criminal investigation, did multiple interviews with John. He told Jack that he had killed Wigley to get him to stop sexually harassing him. John had hid the bindings previously and planned the murder. On May 9th, 2000, Jack conducted a third interview with John. Jack asked John about the relationship he had with Wigley and confronted him with an allegation that he killed Wigley because Wigley had started a relationship with someone else. John denied that was true and said it would have been a blessing if Wigley had a relationship with someone else. Jack interviewed John a fourth time on May 31st, 2000. Jack had sent a letter to the state attorney which contained a riddle about a wristwatch. After killing Wigley, John took Wigley's watch. He denied that he killed for the watch and that he took it since Wigley didn't need it anymore. Jack took possession of the watch during the interview. John had written several letters after the homicide. These letters were addressed to the state attorney, FDLE, the governor, and a newspaper. 2 letters to the state attorney included the riddle about the watch, and one suggesting that other murders in the prison were in some way connected and urging the state attorney to get him to trial. The letter to the FDLE urged the state attorney to be pressured to get John to trial or there would be other murders in the prison system. One letter to a named FDLE agent mentioned that early misinformation John sent about the Adam Walsh case and stated that he had a dream about a crop duster spraying purple haze over a crowded NFL football game in Florida. The first of these 3 letters John sent to the governor asking for a pardon to be released from prison to seek revenge on 11 others in the community. The second letter to the governor related the dream about the crop duster spraying purple haze on a football game. A third letter to the governor admitted that he killed Wigley and he had planned the murder for days. John explained that in that letter that he had a life sentence with no chance of release and therefore had a license to kill. He said there was no advantage or disadvantage to kill inmates or staff when you had a life sentence. The letter suggested that depending on how John's case is resolved will show other inmates with a life sentence if there is a reason not to kill in prison. John stated in this letter that he had vowed to kill 13 people who caused him to unjustly be imprisoned for life and would kill inmates or staff as substitutes. The letter also mentioned the crop duster dream. On March 15th, 2000, during the plea hearing, John told the judge that he planned the murder and that if he didn't get the death penalty, he would continue to kill other people. He pled guilty to the murder. In May 2004, John Blackwell wrote to the CUE, Center for Missing Persons. He claimed that he killed over 60 boys and young men. John later recounted his statement, saying that he wanted to make sure that he was executed, so he lied. John Blackwell received a one-day stay of execution, but was still unalived on May 26, 2004. His last words were, "I am glad I get to go home. I am proud to be a Christian, and I thank Jesus for saving me and allowing me to go home. Amen." John Richard Blackwell's last meal was pizza with cheese, onions, peppers, ground beef, and salad with lettuce, tomatoes, and peppers, cheese, and ranch dressing with a Coke. Personally, I liked this last meal. You can't really go wrong with a pizza. And I mean, who doesn't like a cold Coke? I would say it's not amazing, but it's not bad either. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Usually, this would be where I tell you guys to have a wonderful week and to like and subscribe, but we are doing a double episode. Yep. So, when I was doing my research about John Richard Blackwelder, I went and I started looking into, okay, well, who was Raymond Wigley? And so I started jumping into his case and his accomplice, who was named John Richard Marek. And I thought that that was so odd that both of them were named John Richard, obviously with a different last name. But without further ado, let's talk about Raymond Wigley and John Richard Marek. Marek was born September 17th, 1961 in Germany. Marek was the third oldest son, and his parents were Margaret and Jesse Grimm. Jesse was in the military and stationed in Germany when John was born. The family would move back to the U.S. in 1962. When John was just under a year old, he got into his mother's pills and overdosed on her medication, so he was hospitalized. Doctors were worried that the medication had a negative effect on Marek's brain. So, as John got older, he was put into a special needs class. He had a speech impediment, and it was thought that he had a low IQ. Due to Marek being different, his father rejected him and would flat out deny that Marek was his son. According to Margaret, Jesse was a womanizer, and as a result, she would divorce him in November of 1968. Margaret would retain custody of the children, but when John was 9 years old, he was put into foster care due to his mother being unstable. Marek would eventually age out of the system and had no contact with his biological family. At 19, he was heavily into drinking and had a substance abuse problem, along with bedwetting through his teen years. By the age of 22, John Marek was working on an oil rig in Texas where he would meet Raymond Wigley. The two had known each other for a couple months when they decided to go to Florida for a couple weeks on vacation. They left for Florida on June 13, 1983. Meanwhile, Gene Track and Adela Simmons took a trip up to Largo on June 12th, and they began their trip back to Miami on Thursday, June 16th, 1983 at around 2 p.m. Jean said that her 1982 Chevy Monza started having issues soon after leaving for home, and by the time they hit the Florida Turnpike at around 10:45 p.m., they had to pull over at mile marker 83. A truck pulled off behind them and Marek got out of the truck. He asked the women if he could help. Gene told him he could go to the next service station and call a tow truck or a state trooper, but Marek was unwilling to do this, and he said it had been because he'd been drinking all day. Wigley stayed in the car for most of this interaction. Marek then asked if he could help by fixing the car, but he was unsuccessful. He then offered to take the women to Miami, but they declined. After trying to fix the car for 30 minutes, Wigley then got out of the truck, but didn't say a word. Marek then offered to take one of the women to the nearest telephone. Adela suggested that Jean go with the man because she thought it would be the safer option, but Jean refused to go. Adela then decided to go despite Jean's protest. Adela told Jean that sometimes you have to trust people and that they couldn't sit there all night. At 11:30 p.m., Adela would get into the truck, and this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. The men would drive Adela to Dana Beach, then take her to the lifeguard observation deck. There she was sexually assaulted, beaten, and eventually strangled to death with a bandana. Dr. Wright performed the autopsy on Adela. She had injuries consistent with strangulation. She had numerous facial injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. She had bruises and scrapes down her back, indicating that she was dragged up the lifeguard observation center. Adela had a heel impression on her chest and a great deal of internal bleeding around her kidneys, meaning that she had been kicked with great force. Adela also had burns from a lighter on her fingers and her pubic area, but it was believed that this was done after she had passed at around 3 a.m. The two men left the lifeguard center and ran into police as they were leaving. Once again, Marek did all the talking, telling police that he had been looking for some college friends. Then they left the beach but had to come back as they had realized that they left some clothes behind. Adela's body was found at 7 a.m. the next morning by the lifeguard. At around 11:30 p.m. that night, the two men were arrested because the truck they were driving was stolen. When officers searched the truck, they found Adela's jewelry and firearm, so both Wigley and Marek were charged with murder. Fingerprints were found at the lifeguard tower, matching both Wigley and Marek's, but only Marek's were found inside. Marek claimed that it was all Wigley who killed Adela, but the evidence just didn't support that, nor the fact that Marek did all the talking. Marek said that he had been asleep in the truck and that when he woke up, Adela was gone, and Wigley said that he dropped her off at a gas station. But once again, the evidence just didn't support that, and there was just no way that he couldn't have heard Adela. Raymond Wigley would be sentenced to life in prison on May 29th, 1984, and of course we know what happened to him later. Unfortunately, I couldn't find really any information regarding Raymond Wigley before his life of crime. I couldn't find anything really about when he was born or where he was from. All I know is that he was working on an oil tanker in Texas and ran into two different John Richards. Marek was sentenced to death on July 3rd, 1984. His last meal would be a BLT, berries with whipped cream, French fries, onion rings, and a Dr. Pepper. John Richard Marek's final words were, "Jesus, remember the sinners." He was executed by lethal injection on August 19th, 2009 at 6:33 p.m. So what did you guys think of this episode? I personally thought it was kind of different in a good way. I think it's crazy that there was two different John Richards that were both connected to Raymond Wigley, so I felt I had to cover them both. For John Marek's last meal, I think that it was probably better, in my opinion, than John Blackwelder's. I'm going to give this one probably a 7 out of 10, just slightly better, but I think I would rather have Marek's last meal than the other one. So you let me know what you think. What meal would you choose? And I will see you guys on the next one. Please like and subscribe and all that stuff. See you next week. Bye.